Good morning and welcome back to today's lecture, English for competitive or English literature rather for competitive exams. And I am going to do as usual plenty of exercises with you. You can start revising your literature, your novels. I will also give you a brief overview of what is a novel and what is the point of view and various aspects of it and different kinds of novel. So, what are different kinds of novel? We will see in the course of today's lectures. So, as usual, let us begin with doing some exercises and test your knowledge of English literature. So, please look at the slide here. Your question is, who is the author of this passage? These are the kinds of questions that you can expect. No mockery in this world ever sounds to me so hollow as that of being told to cultivate happiness. What does such advice mean? Happiness is not a potato to be planted in mold and tilled with manure. Happiness is a glory shining far down upon us out of heaven. She is a divine dew which the soul, on certain of its summer mornings, feel dropping upon it from the amaranth bloom and golden fruitage of paradise. Your choices: Jane Austen, Emily Bronte, Charlotte Bronte, George Eliot. So, these are the British women writers. Next one. What point of view is presented in the passage? Be sure that you are going to expect this kind of questions also. Limited point of view, first person, third person, the omniscient. And look, the passages that you have already seen earlier. Now, look at the third question again. Your point of view is based on this particular passage. Question 2 is based on the passage that you just read about happiness. Question 3, what point of view is present here in this particular passage? You are not the kind of guy who would be at a place like this at this time of the morning, but here you are, and you cannot say that the terrain is entirely unfamiliar though the details are fuzzy. You are at a nightclub talking to a girl with a shaved head. The club is either Heartbreak or the Lizard Lounge. What point of view? Choose the correct answer. Limited point of view, first person, second person, the omniscient. Look at this question now, passage 4. Identify the novel here. The world is so taken up of late with novels and romances that it will be hard for a private history to be taken for genuine, where the names and other circumstances of the person are concealed, and on this account we must be content to leave the reader to pass his own opinion upon the ensuing sheet and take it just as he pleases. The author is here supposed to be writing her own history, and in the very beginning of her account she gives the reasons why she thinks fit to conceal her true name, after which there is no occasion to say any more about that. This is part of a novel, beginning of a novel, and you have to identify the novel. Choose the correct response. Moll Flanders, Robinson Crusoe, Sense and Sensibility, Vanity Fair. Next question. Now, this is taken from excerpt from a Virginia Woolf novel. So, identify the Virginia Woolf novel from where the passage is taken. She had a perpetual sense as she watched the taxi cabs of being far out to sea and alone. She always had the feeling that it was very, very dangerous to live even one day. Mrs. Dalloway, To the Lighthouse, Orlando, The Waves. These are your choices. Which is the novel? Next question. Number 6. For which novel did Horace Walpole, he was a novelist as well, he said, this is a kind of novel, the whole narration is always going backwards. So, this is said regarding or for Tristram Shandy, Heart of Darkness, Ulysses, Mrs. Dalloway. Number 7. Who do you associate the following quotes with? These are 3 quotes, okay? And you have to think of the authors that can be associated with each quote. The self is temporal, opening out into the past, present and future, changing yet continuous. Second, consciousness cannot be analyzed into fragments. It is nothing jointed. It flows the stream of thought consciousness or of subjective life. Number 3, the idea of the intuitive self focuses on the role of memory in human experience. Memory activated by concrete sensation can help recapture past time, allowing the self to re-enter the fluid world of endurance and rediscover a partially lost concrete past. Your choices: William James, second Proust, or Henry Bergson. So, what should be the correct order? Next one, read the following passage. You are about to begin reading Italo Calvino's new novel, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. Relax, concentrate, best to close the door, the TV is always on in the next room. Tell the others right away, no, I don't want to watch TV, or if you prefer, don't say anything, just hope they leave you alone. This passage is an example of, and this is your question, self-reflexive novel, focalization, magic realism, unreliable narrator. Next, identify the critic, directly or indirectly, and whether the writer himself is conscious of it or not. Every novel must necessarily present a certain view of life and of some of the problems of life. That is, it must so exhibit incidents, characters, passions, motives as to reveal more or less distinctly the way in which the author looks out upon the world and his general attitude towards it. Identify the critic. W. H. Hudson, Walter Allen, Henry James, E. M. Forster. Identify the author. Why does it disturb us that Don Quixote to be a reader of Quixote and Hamlet a spectator of Hamlet? These inversions suggest that if the characters in a story can be readers or spectators, then we, their readers or spectators, can be fictitious. Who said that? Choose the right answer. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Julio Cortázar, Mario Vargas Llosa, Jean-Louis Borges. Who could be the author of that? Next question. Read the following passage. And when I look around the apartment where I now am, when I see Charlotte's apparel lying before me and Albert's writings and all those articles of furniture which are so familiar to me, even to the very inkstand which I am using, when I think what I am to this family, everything, my friends esteem me, I often contribute to their happiness, and my heart seems as if it could not beat without them. And yet, if I were to die, if I were to be summoned from the midst of this circle, would they feel, or how long would they feel, the void which my loss would make in their existence? How long? Yes, such is the frailty of man that even there where he has the greatest consciousness of his own being, where he makes the strongest and most forcible impression, even in the memory, in the heart of his beloved, there also he must perish, vanish, and that quickly. This novel is an example of Bildungsroman, magic realism, metafiction, historical novel. I am not asking you to guess the author or the name of the novel. I am asking you, what example is this? This is also a kind of variety of question, the kind of questions that you can be asked. No names given, no titles given, just an extract and how, what is the genre of this. So, be prepared for this as well. It may be rare, but definitely you can expect. Next one, read the following. What you call a race is nothing but a collection of riff-raff like me, bleary-eyed, flea-bitten, chilled to the bone. They came from the four corners of the earth, driven by hunger, plague, tumors and the cold, and stopped here. They couldn't go any further because of the ocean. That's France, that's the French people. The novel is an example of magic realism, anti-novel, stream of consciousness, black humor. So now let's start looking at the answers or discussing the answers. So your first answer, which was based on what is happiness, is Charlotte Bronte's Villette. So who is the author? Charlotte Bronte, not Emily, not Jane Austen, it's Charlotte Bronte and her novel Villette. The second example is a first person narrative. It's a first person narrative, and the third one and the third question is an example of second person narrative, you, okay, which is always, so point of view. I am not saying narrative, it is a point of view. So, second person point of view because of the constant use of the pronoun you. It is taken from J. McInerney American novel Bright Lights and Big City, a 1984 novel. You should know that the second person may turn out to be a specific fictional character or the reader of the story. So, you therefore, even in one of the other passages that I did with you just now, you get the second person point of view, but we are going to talk about it later. So, you have to know that the reader of the story is can also be a fictional character or even the narrator himself or herself, or not clearly or consistently anyone. The story may unfold by shifting between telling the narrative what he or she is now doing, has done in the past, or will be commanded or told to do in the future. So, you, the second person is important, it is very postmodernist trait. So, you have to keep that in mind. Question 4, it is from Moll Flanders by Daniel Defoe, and the extract, Virginia Woolf extract, is from Mrs. Dalloway. Who is the heroine? Who is the speaker there? Clarissa Dalloway. Remember who is she? It is a very important text, and Virginia Woolf, of course, I do not have to stress upon the significance of Virginia Woolf. She is repeatedly asked in competitive exams. So, Clarissa Dalloway is middle-aged, middle-class wife of an MP, Member of Parliament, living in London in the early 20th century. The novel follows her experiences throughout a single day in June 1923 as she makes preparation for a party, and as the narrative moves in and out of her thoughts, impressions and memories, we see that she has squandered away many of her opportunities and let go of her happiness because of societal pressures, her inability to rebel and giving in to conform to what is expected of her. So, one of the major feminist writers and a very seminal work of feminist writing. Horace Walpole, his comment is on Lawrence Stern's Tristram Shandy. Tristram Shandy. And question 7, where you are asked for 3 philosophers, thinkers, critics. A. Henry Bergson or Henry Bergson, he happens to be a French writer. Second, or B. William James, Henry James's brother. And third, about memory and past, Marcel Proust. Whenever there is an extract talking about memories and past, you have to think of Marcel Proust before looking at other choices. If on a Winter's Night is a postmodernist novel, and from among the choices, the best response is self-reflexive novel. It's not magical realism or historical novel or anything like that. Question 9, the critic, it's W.H. Hudson. So, answer is A. And then whereas Hamlet is a spectator of his own story, that's the response is D. Georges Louis Boré. He is the critic, or he is the writer of that quote. Charlotte and her apparel, and whether what happens to us and how quickly we vanish from memories and hearts, that is taken from The Sorrows of Young Werther by J.W. Goethe or Goethe, the German writer, and it's an example of Bildungsroman, coming of age novel. And the last question, the answer is B, anti-novel. It's taken from, again it's a French novel, Céline's French novel, Journey into the End of the Night. So, now let me give you a quick introduction to what is a novel. Originally, it is an Italian word, novella, or it's a tale, T-A-L-E, and Spanish novela again. So, now we use novella for something else. Italian word, that's the origin, and Spanish novella. Now we use it, we use the word novella to denote something that is not very long, you know, bigger than a short story but less than a proper novel. But that is the origin of the word novel, from novella. One of the most flexible of all literary genres. Of course, people can say the same about poetry also, but then poetry, as we all know, has its constraints, has its own the framework. But novel is undoubtedly the most flexible of all literary genres. The way we understand novels today, it started from the 16th century, and from 16th to the 18th century denoted a prose narrative about characters and their actions. So, plot traditional features are plot and character. As Henry James in his Art of Fiction says, what is character but the determination of incident, and what is incident but the illustration of character. Okay? So, that is the way. A novel has a point of view. We have been talking about points of view in several questions earlier. What is it? What is a point of view? It is the angle of vision or perspective from which events are represented in a narrative, how events unfold. So, whose point of view? Sometimes, and especially in modern novels, we find multiple points of view. It makes a very interesting read. So we get, that Rashomon effect. Several points of view are implicit in the same work. French critic Gérard Gennet, he prefers the term focalization. So it's the same word in a new bottle. So something like, or focalization is who sees, that is perspective, who speaks is the voice. So that's what Gennet tells us to do. Narratives can be omniscient, third person and first person, and sometimes even second person, as we have seen. Some of the popular subcategories of novels are, and this is the kind of question that you can expect. So you can start looking up the subcategories. For example, epistolary. What happens in an epistolary novel? Lots of letters are written throughout. The Dangerous Liaison. Okay, it's a French novel which is completely written in an epistolary style. Many of Jane Austen's novels can be read in an epistolary style. We also had sentimental novel. The early 17th, 18th century writers like Richardson and Fielding, they would use that. Romance, okay, think Gone with the Wind. Okay, so romance, you know, men, women, society and lifestyle. So that is a kind of a romance, very popular genre. Gothic novel, several examples. Wuthering Heights is an ace example of Gothic novel, but there are several others also. Historical, Sir Walter Scott's historical novels. We have regional novels, Thomas Hardy's for example, or Faulkner's novels of local color. Then we have detective, thriller, crime, psychological novels of sensations like Wilkie Collins' The Woman in White. So all these were the categories till the early 20th century or the mid 20th century. When you think of people like Thackeray and Dickens predominantly, the novel was used as a public instrument focusing on socially relevant and significant issues. From 20th century onwards, political movements, the First and the Second World War, theories of Marxism and Freudian principles all compounded the breakdown of coherence and faith in shared beliefs, and now it is impacted literature also, of course, novels. So all these things, all these factors led writers to question hierarchies in all spheres, and thus the growth of experimental novels. Experimental novels that break away from the traditional storytelling mode. I keep talking about Sterne's Tristram Shandy. I gave you the quote also, Horace Walpole's, that is a kind of novel that where the whole narration is going backwards. Okay, so that was an experiment. More experimentalists or more experimental novels came and were reflected in the works of Marcel Proust, Remembrance of Things Past, then Kafka, Camus, all these existentialist writers, yeah, Faulkner, Nabokov, Vladimir Nabokov, the author of Pale Fire and more famously Lolita, James Joyce, very popular from the exams point of view. And then Céline, Louis Ferdinand Céline, Journey into the End of the Night. It's a 1932 novel, one of the first absurdist novels. So, anti-novel is a term that you should know. It is a term used, or it was a term that was first used by someone called Charles Sorel, S-O-R-E-L. Its features were lack of an obvious plot, diffused episodes, minimal development of characters. Reader by more or less was expected to infer their own meanings or supply their own endings. These writers would experiment with vocabulary, punctuation. They would give detailed analysis of objects, repetitions, variations of time sequences, alternative endings, beginnings, okay, anything was possible. Sometimes even blank pages with geometrical patterns, and that is what you were given. For example, in Journey to the End of the Night, it has multiple repetitions and characters where no explanation is given for their actions. So again, breaking away from the notion of that what is a novel but character, and character is plot. So it didn't work anymore after the First World War. So again, I am coming back to Louis Ferdinand Céline's work. The hero is Ferdinand Bardemou. He is a doctor in French colonial Africa. He is hate driven, morally corrupt. Still, he is attractive, he is remarkable because he combines the nihilism, the existentialism, the disenchantment with the existing society, and with uh, acerbic wit and belief in fatalism. So, characters, their motives became increasingly hard to understand. I am just giving you an example because it is a seminal work of the 20th century. One of the novels that questioned the traditional structuring or hierarchies of a novel, Journey to the End of the Night. There was also the growth of Nuova Roma, that is new novel, French word, Nouveau Roma. Nouveau is new, Roma is novel. Rob Grillet, Alan Rob Grillet, he gave the theory of on nature and future of the novel in his book for a new novel, Pour a Nouveau Roma, 1963. And this movement was supposedly biblioclastic. It rejected much that had gone before. Rob Grillet regarded the earlier novelists as old people, old fashioned, okay, vieux, old fashioned, no longer in vogue. So, the idea was novel should be about things, an individual version about things, not just to follow, but an individual's response to his perceptions and his sensations. Nathalie Sarraute was another important writer who wrote Tropismes, Tropismes in 1939, a prototype Nouveau Roman or new novel aiming to radically transform traditional narrative models of character and plot. So, Nathalie Sarraute. There should be an E. Of course, the most recognizable novel which most people enjoy reading, it goes by the tenets of realism, where the plot is gives you a straightforward portrayal of life with as much fidelity to realism. It corresponds with coherence, and theories of coherence, they involve knowing the world by perception, intuition, sensation. Honoré de Balzac, the French writer, he gave us the famous term la condition humaine, the human condition. Okay, so all these European writers, Balzac, Émile Zola, Guy de Maupassant, Stendhal, even the Russians, the great Russian masters, Tolstoy, Gorky, Turgenev. So, these were the realists, and from here we also get the concept of psychological realism, depicting the inner workings of the mind. So, when I gave you the passage from Mrs. Dalloway, that is psychological realism. Also, there is a concept of stream of consciousness we will be doing as we move further into the course. So, a stream of consciousness is the analysis of thoughts and feelings, the presentation of nature of personality and character, and all about digging deeper into the conscious and subconscious territories. This was not done before, but it is an offshoot of realism. Psychological realism paved way for anti-realistic novels and rejected that sort of, for example, in Mrs. Dalloway, coming back again, which is quite a psychologically real and stream of conscious novel, where the entire plot story takes place within the mind of Clarissa Dalloway within a span of one day, but in one day she goes through her entire lifetime and relationships and loves and regrets. We also have a concept of magical realism. It's a concept given to us by Aloysio Carpentier. Okay, Spanish writers, Aloysio Carpentier. It's a mode of narrative that mixes the real and the fantastic to make real seem magical and the improbable real. It's a major subversive anti-realistic device. Authors do that to convey hard social realities. It subverts the existing conventions of reality, but beneath the surface there is a stark commentary on the social conditions. Here is a video, link to the video, Salman Rushdie on magic realism. Please do take a look at it, where Salman Rushdie explains the notion of realism and then magic realism. There is also a concept of, or a term called metafiction. See, a realist novel traditionally is unconscious about the process of its telling. We do not get to see the writer coming out and telling us that you reader, you are reading a novel here, that there is that consciousness is not given. A realistic novel effaces its identity as a work of art. It hides it, invisible. Okay? It attempts to present quote unquote a slice of life. Metafiction, however, suspends the illusion of mimesis. Mimesis is mimicking reality. It reveals the artificial nature of narrative and art. It's basically, metafiction is basically an anti-illusionist mode of narrative self-consciousness. The term used by William H. Gass in a 1970 essay, Philosophy and the Form of Fiction, talks about what is the function of metafiction. And what it does, it signals the kind of text that emphasizes its status as a text. Metafiction is aware of the fact that it's fiction. Metafiction is a prime example of the self-aware vibe we often find in postmodernism. It's a postmodernist trait. Rather than trying to pass itself off as a window on the world, a slice of life, and disguise therefore its structure and techniques, metafiction lays its technique completely threadbare, as they say, quote unquote, laying one's cards on the table. There are lots of ways in which authors can create this effect. Story within a story, making obvious references to storytelling conventions, talking to the author, okay, calling attention to the process of writing and reading. All these techniques are very commonly used in this genre called metafiction. Well, not exactly a genre, but this device of metafiction. So, this technique rather started to attract attention in the 1960s when it was used in classic texts such as John Bart's Lost in the Fun House, Thomas Pynchon's The Crying of Lot 49 and Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. Meta and all these novels. These are very important novels, you should know them. The device, the technique then reached the height of its popularity in the 70s. Metafiction today has spread out much wider, becoming a major part of pop culture. But Linda Hutcheon, the postmodernist critic, she came up with her own term, historiographic metafiction. Historiographic metafiction. So, you should know, if you come across this term, think Linda Hutcheon. She uses it in 1988. The term describes fictional texts that bring history into the mix, a combo that makes us away from the idea of history as fact and highlights that writers can put their own spin on things. Okay? So, that is your metafiction. And the next concept that I wanted to discuss was, I already told you about Bildungsroman, that is coming of age, and quite related to this is picaresque. Again, picaresque is something that one usually find in English literature, in competitive exams focusing on English literature. Picaresque novels, they are realistic fiction, they originated in Spain. One of the earliest was a 1554 novel, Lazarillo de Tormes, and Guzman de Alfarache, which was in 1559. Here the protagonist is a picaro, a scoundrel of low birth and evil life, at war, at a struggle with society. Picaro is an independent character, his or her own man, and gives us an autobiographical account of adventures, misfortunes and punishments. One common thread that runs through all these narratives is that all picaros, these are the protagonists, had a series of tyrannical owners or masters. It could be your boss, your superior, your husband, anyone in the position of authority. So, it is a rebellion against that kind of power structure. And a picaro, how does a picaro get his or her way around the world? By cheating, deceit, sexual betrayal, all parts of his attempts to come up in life or to break free from the authoritative repression. A picaresque novel is generally written in episodic plot, told by a narrator who keeps on and on about that. Journey is a constant feature, a leitmotif. A picaro has to travel from one place to another and get a variety of sensations and experiences. They may be in prisons, they may be executed, or may sail off to distant lands, they may be in exile, whatever. So, things happen to them. Some of the great examples are Daniel Defoe's Moll Flanders that we just did, 18th century novel, Tobias Smollett's Roderick Random, and Adventures of Ferdinand Count Fathom. More recently, Peter Suskind's Perfume, a novel that is so beloved and so popular among current generation. Think of Indian novels also, Vikas Swaroop's Q&A, the Slumdog Millionaire was based on it, and Arvind Adiga's White Tiger. So, these are adventures of a picaro. Before I wind up, I want you to have a look at this slide, how novel over the period of several centuries evolved and found its way, novel in its recognizable form. Tale of Genji, Decameron, 14th century Italy. Don Quixote, Gargantua by Rabelais. Philip Sidney's Arcadia, the Elizabethan great poet and critic and writer. Robinson Crusoe, Walter Scott, Jane Austen's works in 19th century, Dickens and Thackeray, George Eliot, Bronte sisters, Thomas Hardy, R.L. Stevenson, Guy de Maupassant, Goethe. These are the people responsible for giving us novels in its recognizable form. These are the writers and their works you can expect. Look at this slide also, some of the major novelists across the world. Melville, Hawthorne, Cooper, Mark Twain, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky are taken and clubbed all the masters together. I am not constrained by or restricted by national geographic boundaries. Dostoevsky, Gorky, Henry James, Flaubert, H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, Joseph Conrad, and also D.H. Lawrence, Virginia Woolf, Aldous Huxley, E.M. Forster, Edith Wharton, Hemingway, Eric Maria Remarque, all quiet on the Western Front, Mikhail Sholokhov, Thomas Mann, Henry Miller, Michael Ondaatje, that is very recent, but then, and then the American greats, Sinclair Lewis, Upton Sinclair, John Steinbeck, Theodore Dreiser, John Updike, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and Saul Bellow. So, please look at all these writers. To ace an exam, especially at an international level, is not going to be easy. One has to be extremely well read. So, before we wind up, I would like you to look at this particular video, look at the slide here and look at the link, history of the novel. It gives you a nice overview. It is a lecture, it gives you an overview of how the novel evolved. Thank you very much.